This podcast is a production of Widener Law Commonwealth in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. For more information, visit commonwealthlaw.widener.edu/podcast. Keeping up with the latest legal thinking can be challenging. Our educational programs help you stay tuned in to the legal profession. The following is a recording from the 2023 annual John Gedid lecture series entitled Administrative Governance in the ChatGPT Era and Beyond.
It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 16th annual John Gedid Lecture, named for the founder of our Law and Government Institute, Emeritus Professor John Gedid. We are delighted to have John with us today. Welcome, John. At Widener Law Commonwealth, our mission is to produce professionals, lawyers who are highly ethical, mindful of the public interest, and engaged as leaders in their communities. We seek to transform promising students into skilled lawyers who know the law and use the law to compassionately solve problems, whether they serve in government or in the private sector. Our signature programs, the Law and Government Institute, the Environmental Law and Sustainability Center, and the Business Advising Program, all seek to engage our students in this most important work. Today, we celebrate our Law and Government Institute, which helps students explore how the government works and the roles that lawyers play in making and implementing the law. I hope that you find today's lecture engaging and thought-provoking. It is now my pleasure to introduce Professor Jill Family, who is the faculty advisor to the Law and Government Institute. Professor?
Thank you, Dean Hussey. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that we're able to gather for our annual Gedid lecture. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to say a few more words about John Gedid, who, as Dean Hussey mentioned, is able to join us today. Not only was John Gedid the founding dean of Widener Law Commonwealth, so literally the school wouldn't exist without him, he also started the Law and Government Institute. So it is very much his vision that we continue to implement today, with myself as faculty advisor to the Institute and Rob Teplitz, who is directing the Institute. And so just a big thanks for all of us, from all of us at Widener Law Commonwealth to John Gedid for all that he has done, both to get the law school started and also to put us on such a wonderful path. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Lindsay Williamson, who is one of our student leaders, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Professor Family. The Law and Government Institute is pleased to present this year's Gedid Lecture speaker, Cary Coglianese. Professor Coglianese is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Cary Law School, where he teaches courses on administrative law, environmental law, regulatory law and policy analysis. He is also the founding director of the Penn Program on regulation. Professor Coglianese specializes in the study of administrative law and regulatory processes, with an emphasis on the empirical evaluation of alternative processes and strategies, and the role of public participation, technology, and business government relations in policymaking. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Mr. Cary Coglianese.
Thank you very much, Lindsay, for that nice introduction. Thank you, Dean Hussey and Professor Family, for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. And of course, I want to thank John Gedid for his leadership in the profession and for his leadership in this lecture. I'm very honored to be with you today to share my thoughts about the future of law, and especially a future in light of advances in artificial intelligence. Now, as with any talk about the future, there's going to be some limitations on what I can say with definitiveness. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of questions about where new artificial intelligence technology will take us. But I do think there's some things that we can say already by way of trends. I've been looking at some of these issues for over 20 years now, from the beginning of what was known in the 1990s as e-rulemaking to currently serving as chair of a National Academy of Sciences committee, trying to look forward to the challenges, many of which are related to automation in the maritime industry and its regulation. Along the way, I've been thinking about and writing a fair amount about the role of artificial intelligence in the administrative state. Now, there's going to be a lot of implications for artificial intelligence and its use by the private sector, and what that will all mean for society. I'm going to focus today on its implications for administrative governance, for the day-to-day workings of administrative governance. And with that in mind, here's just in 5 simple points what I hope to get across today throughout my lecture. First, and this is perhaps the most evident right now, but also the most uncertain. We know that AI technology is being implemented already by government agencies in their domestic policy and implementation of public administration. And it's already being put to use, and I think it will transform administrative governance in important ways. But the challenge we face is to make sure that it transforms governance in a way that delivers, on balance, more good than harm. And it's not to say that governance will be perfect with the application of artificial intelligence, that it won't even introduce some new problems. But the question and the challenge before us, I think, over the next decade, at least, if not beyond, will be to figure out how to make this transformation in a way that ends up on balance to be better than what we have today, which is far from a perfect system of governance. I will say that I don't think current administrative law is sufficient to ensure that we can meet that challenge of a net positive transformation. And I'll explain why. In some ways, I think the use of artificial intelligence is the apotheosis of all that administrative law is seeking to accomplish. I'm going to suggest that where we're going to need to go in the future is through the implementation of what I'm going to call management-based standards to help ensure that we have applications of artificial intelligence that are tested, that are monitored, and that are performing in responsible ways. And lastly, I hope that in the future we're going to see this transformation occur in a way that actually preserves, if not even enhances, the role of human empathy in future governance. And arguably, I think we may be able to find ways, if we're thoughtful, of improving government and its empathy toward those that it governs. So with that, let me just set the stage with a little historical walkthrough of how law was practiced 30 years ago using these kind of books. And then about that time, this little contraption came about, which many people in the audience may have never seen, but for those who were practicing around the time that Lexis came out, you knew that there was one single terminal that could be found in a law library, whether at a law school or at a law firm, that you had to limit your amount of time on it to do research. But of course, today, what do we all have? We have access to Lexis and Westlaw available on our laptops, on our tablets, and our phones. And rather than learning the very special language that the red machine required you to master, you can put in natural language to do a lot of your searching. So that's where we had been up until last year, really. And then come November, we had the introduction of ChatGPT 3.5 that scored on the Uniform Bar Exam, which is a multiple choice and essay exam, at the 10th percentile. Not very respectable, gave a lot of confidence still that there was a lot of still differentiation between humans and machines. But then what do we find come March of this year, just last month, OpenAI introduced its next version of ChatGPT, and it scores at the 90th percentile. And if you look at their what's called system card, you can find the documentation for that. Now, just think about that, how profound that is. Really, we as humans go to law school for 3 years, and we spend 3 months during the summer studying for the bar exam to be able to take it. And within about 3 or 4 months, just upgrading, going from one version of ChatGPT to the other, you've seen this dramatic improvement in what it's able to do on tasks that humans right now perform. This transformation, which is not just in terms of its performance on the bar exam, but in creating a much more human-like receptivity and responsiveness to queries, has led to thousands of industry insiders and others to sign on recently to an open letter calling for a 6-month pause, and for others to say, wait a minute, 6 months, we need something longer. Maybe we need 30 years even. Why? Because this technology has really demonstrated human capabilities of 90 percentile level of performance on even an essay-based bar exam. Really quite remarkable where this is all going to go. So what I want to do, is just first of all set a little bit of groundwork. Why is this even possible? What is this technology? And let me just start by saying, what is this machine learning algorithm technology? It's a predictive approach to data analysis. It leads to forecasts, outputs based upon data inputs. And some of the synonyms are artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, reinforcement learning. There's actually a wide range of different types of machine learning algorithms. So I'm going to be rather general in our in this lecture here today. But in general, what these algorithms do is they tend to, they're learning by selecting variables and sometimes even the functional form of the relationship, the mathematical relationship between these variables through repeated exploration with data. Just one type of machine learning, often called random forest, actually tries many different combinations of variables and functional forms until it finds the one that yields the best forecast. We see the implications of machine learning whenever we go to Amazon and it gives us predictions of what else we might like to buy, for example. But what is not machine learning? What are we not talking about? This is not traditional statistical analysis, which had equations like this that were specified by humans that picked the variables and the functional forms between them. And because humans could select them, and even as complex as they might seem, they could be nevertheless more easily and intuitively predictable. What we have with machine learning, however, though, is a process that leads to much more accurate and precise forecasts of outcomes, because it's not humans that are selecting the variables and the functional forms. And to some extent, those variable selection and the functional form selection is informed by theory and domain knowledge, but the algorithms through exploration of the data, finding patterns within the data, can lead to much more accurate and precise forecasts of outcomes. And by large amounts of data here, just keep in mind that ChatGPT, which is the OpenAI version of a large language model or generative AI technology. Google has come out with its own version called Bard. China's Alibaba just today announced its own version. We're talking about processing and finding patterns in billions of data, analyzing the sweep of words and language in those technologies through the entire internet. finding the patterns, and then making forecasts about when a particular prompt is given, what would be, based upon patterns in the data on the internet and in human language already, what would be the patterns that could be generating a response that would be sensible and hopefully accurate. And as the data from the change from ChatGPT 3.5 to version 4 indicates on the Uniform Bar Exam, it's doing pretty well at that. But it's trained and looking for patterns on large volumes of data. These systems, then, this technology can be built into automated systems, whether it's chat systems, so you could have an automated response for customer service, for example, with something like a ChatGPT. You can also build it into automated systems for making, as I indicated, Amazon or Netflix recommendations. One of the first uses of this technology in the federal government sector was actually in recognizing handwriting. And the U.S. Postal Service implemented machine learning technology to help read and process the mail better. That's an example of using this in an automated system. But it's because of the learning nature, the self-learning nature of these algorithms, it's less intuitively obvious how the outcomes come about, what explains them. That's why these are sometimes referred to as black box algorithms. No human is selecting the variables or functional forms. And by and large, this technology it leads to forecasts, but not necessarily causal claims. So we can't, from this technology, very easily say, well, if someone increases or decreases a certain variable, it will be more or less likely to generate a different outcome. That's difficult, but it is being used widely in the private sector, and I think we're already seeing indications of a lot of firms wanting to deploy the large language models in chat systems and in search algorithms, in systems like Alexa on Amazon and so forth, to be able to interact with customers. It's service operations optimization, one of the really the most popular uses right now, according to a survey by McKinsey and Company. And that, I think, is indicative, and the reason I mention it is indicative of where we're likely to see this being deployed in the federal government and in state and local governments in the years ahead, especially as people get accustomed to the kind of service that these AI tools provide. They're going to be asking, why aren't we getting that same kind of service in the public sector as well? We do see already, and the Administrative Conference of the United States has affirmed this, we do see some uses of artificial intelligence at the local, state, and federal levels of government in the United States and in governments around the world. It is changing how government agencies, we're seeing them use artificial intelligence for service administration, determining where to send various social services. The city of Chicago is determining where to place the pest control bait and other kinds of traps around the city based upon an artificial intelligence tool. It's going to improve the services. There's civil enforcement being used to allocate scarce inspectors and target cases of fraud, and or the city of New York using it to determine where to send building inspectors and fire inspectors. We do see law enforcement uses of this in controversial ways, but also allocating police patrols. Formal adjudication at the federal level, the Social Security Administration has used an artificial intelligence tool for quality control purposes, not to actually do adjudication, but at least to review the quality of its administrative law judges' performance and decision-making. We see this being used in informal adjudication. If anybody's come in from overseas and encountered the facial recognition software as you enter the airport and return to the United States, that's an example that's powered by machine learning algorithms. Agencies are certainly using this for research underlying rulemaking, and they have been using it for analyzing public input in the rulemaking process. A few years ago, researchers from Stanford and NYU charged some graduate students to look for all the possible use cases of artificial intelligence across the federal government. And this is the distribution that they found. Most of the uses at that time were being devoted to research and analysis. Some uses for enforcement, the next biggest category, usually in targeting where to look for fraud, where the IRS could potentially find taxpayer audits that would have violations of tax regulations and so forth. Some for public services, engagement, internal management, and adjudication review. So it is being used today, and the good question might be, why? Why are they using it? Well, the simple answer is to overcome human limitations. This is the case for using artificial intelligence anywhere, but certainly in government, we have to recognize that human decision makers have limitations. We have physical limitations. Humans can only generally hold 4 to 5 variables in their mind at any point in time, and yet keep in mind the power of the machine learning algorithms is that they can find pattern recognition in upwards of billions of variables. Obviously, we have other kinds of physical limitations. We also have a whole host of biases as well. And when we get together in groups, whether it's on collective committees or panels of judges or group decision making in task forces within agencies or in legislatures, we know that there's a host of deficiencies and dysfunctionalities that can arise. So we're not perfect. That's not to say that artificial intelligence is, but the search here is to find ways to overcome these human limitations, and sometimes they can do that very well. And for example, when it comes to reading handwriting on mail, the U.S. Postal System's software performs much faster and more efficiently and accurately even than humans can. So this is what's driving the interest in artificial intelligence. This is what's driving, I think, the most optimistic vision going forward for artificial intelligence. And as I'll say in a little bit, there's some research that shows that this is really indeed working. I want to just step back to thinking about how this might be used in the ChatGPT context. And I was looking back recently at a report that I published over 20 years ago now through a project with the National Science Foundation, in which we brought together lawyers and public officials and computer scientists to try to identify ways that technology could help enhance the regulatory process. And one idea in that report was that might be developed translation software that could take very complex regulations and translate them into plainer English that could help facilitate public understanding of rules and compliance with rules. So with that in mind, I said, well, let's take a look and see what ChatGPT could do. And I asked it, what are the current federal nitrogen oxide emissions limits for an automobile in the United States? And it gave me a brief and answer that's understandable. And compared with, if you go to the Federal Register, the hundreds of pages of the EPA's regulation, this was a nice little summary. If you go to Google's Bard, you can find a similar sort of answer. Notice, however, any perceptive viewer, that the ChatGPT version and the Bard version are giving me some different answers. And there are clear examples of this technology hallucinating, making up, and one has to be careful about its accuracy. But it does show you at least the potential for that kind of translation software, and how maybe in the future, as this develops, and if it develops at the pace that it has from ChatGPT 3.5 to ChatGPT 4, it's going to be just getting more accurate over time. Now, we do have, stepping back, we do have actually some very solid research that indicates that artificial intelligence tools can outperform administrators in a variety of settings. A research study looked at the use of a machine learning tool to identify passengers during the COVID pandemic who were asymptomatic and shouldn't be getting on airplanes, and using that tool improved the Greek border officials' ability to identify those infected but asymptomatic travelers on the order of 2 to 4 times better than they had. Another study shows that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency could identify 6 times as many water pollution violators by using artificial intelligence tools. And another study shows that in domestic violence cases, using machine learning to make arraignment decisions could cut down rearrest by 50%. These are just some of the studies that indicate the power of these tools and how they can, when designed well and used responsibly, lead to better outcomes for the public. What about then the possibility of using AI as law itself? By that, I mean that AI could be used to determinatively set rules, what I've called rulemaking by robot, or to determinatively settle matters and issue binding orders, or what I would call adjudicating by algorithm. Let me just give you an example, a hypothetical example of what AI as law could entail. What we have right now in the area of aviation safety is a regulation that says that no one may serve as a pilot of a commercial aircraft if they are over 65 years of age, 65 years or older. Now, this kind of rule, like many rules in law, has the traditional and well-known problems of over and under inclusiveness. It's not really something that magically happens when someone goes from their being the age of 64 and 364 days to their 65th birthday that suddenly makes them qualitatively less safe to fly, and there will be some number of pilots under the age of 65 who are not safe, and there will be some who are over 65 who are not only safe, may be safer than those who are younger. It's no accident that it was a very experienced and older pilot who was really close to the threshold here for the age limit on piloting, who was able to land a commercial aircraft on the Hudson River when its engines were disabled in flight and saved all the passengers. So that's the problem with the current rules. What if, and this is again hypothetical, but it's a way of thinking about how AI could be used to replace law. Suppose that instead of having a very simple 65-year age threshold, we instituted an AI tool that made a prediction about an individual's ability to fly aircraft in a safe manner. And the pilot's license is issued not based upon age, but based upon a tool that accurately forecasts pilots' ability to fly safely. Now, again, I wanted to see if something like AI as law itself might be usable today. It's something that actually 20 years ago, I argued we might see information technology that could transform rules from the text, like the 65-year age threshold, into software packages and algorithms, what I called at that time TurboTax rules. But we could think about what would ChatGPT do? And I just gave ChatGPT a response asking it to write a regulation governing the use of ChatGPT by federal agencies. And while it doesn't give me a regulation of the kind one might find in the Federal Register, it doesn't look too dissimilar to the kinds of principles that one finds in a wide variety of government and think tank reports and standards today. A nice 10-point list. Just if you're interested, I put the same prompt in BARD, and here it gives me a little bit more of a rule-like structure, giving me the purpose, the scope, some definitions, and then policy, and then some requirements, and even an effective date for the regulation. Now, this again is very limited. We're not there yet, but is this a path to where we're going? Let me just say that we do have one instance where there are rules actually being created automatically. They're very simple rules. They're not written down in the way that I've asked ChatGPT or BARD to write them. But we have in several of our major cities, Pittsburgh being one of them, and Los Angeles being another, we have artificial intelligence that's driving the traffic signaling systems through these cities. It's a learning technology, so no one really knows why at any given time on any given street the traffic light is green and why it turns red when it does, but the system is designed so that the algorithm finds patterns based upon sensors that are in the streets that can optimize for traffic flow. And I say that this is an instance of AI as law, just maybe more metaphorically, but in reality, for anyone who is on a particular street at a particular time, what that traffic light is showing is articulating a rule that you have to follow, stop or go. So if we could think about the future, I think we have to recognize that we'll see other applications similar to this and with increasing sophistication. Now, for some of you, that may seem unsettling, and there are reasons to be concerned, no doubt, about how these systems would work, particularly if we get beyond just something as basic as a traffic signaling system. Can administrative law help us? I don't think so. I think administrative law today accommodates the use of regulating by robot and adjudicating by algorithm. First of all, there's no statutes, I should say, right now or case law that are really squarely or directly on point. There are some state level decisions, a case in Wisconsin, for example, on a risk algorithm used in a criminal law context. It really isn't a machine learning algorithm. There are other cases that deal with other kinds of non-learning algorithms as well. I do think that it's going to be very clear that how a government uses machine learning will certainly be important. If they use it for uses that violate First Amendment rights, well, that will be problematic. But in general, the question I guess is there anything intrinsic about machine learning that stands in tension with administrative law? And I don't think so. I just give you three major doctrines of administrative law and just briefly walk through each of these to indicate how that even though we are a system dedicated to government of the people and by the people, as Abraham Lincoln once said, We don't necessarily, I think, have a legal system that prevents government agencies from relying on these tools, even to determine, for example, whether somebody gets a pilot's license. Take non-delegation doctrine. Would it be unconstitutional to delegate authority to some ChatGPT or other artificial intelligence tool? I don't think it's likely. Why? Because that doctrine requires an intelligible principle. And algorithms, objective functions, the way they're designed, they necessarily have to be intelligible. They have to be mathematically precise. What is it that we're trying to optimize for? And with something like ChatGPT, essentially, it's trying to optimize for every next word in a sentence and every next sentence in a paragraph. What's the probability that it matches a pattern that mirrors the patterns found in billions and billions of data that it's analyzed? So it has to be mathematically precise. Is this akin to some kind of unconstitutional delegation to a private entity? Because maybe AI is not truly governmental, maybe, and in fact, in many cases, government agencies are relying on private contractors. I still don't think this is likely because algorithms themselves are not bringing the kinds of conflicts of interest that the private non-delegation doctrine is all about. And they're working subordinate ultimately to government officials who have to design them and set them up and run them and could ultimately pull the plug on them. They are, in effect, a lot like a measurement tool. And just as government agencies have used machines and thermometers and other kinds of physical devices over the years, a well-designed and well-validated algorithm would be akin to that. Take the due process clause. You might say, well, wait, shouldn't there be a right to a human decision? That is a concept that many are talking about. But under our current standards for due process, I don't think that is likely to be a right to human decision-making. The canonical doctrine is based upon Matthews v. Eldridge, and it calls for a balancing of three factors. The first factor are the private interests at stake. That's going to be what it's going to be, whether it's a human making the decision or an algorithm making the decision. So it's exogenous. But the other two are ones where it should weigh in favor of the artificial intelligence tool. These should be more accurate, and they're going to lower the costs of decision making, speeding up the process. Keep in mind that under the status quo, we have a lot of delays, as well as inconsistencies and biases that have been widely documented by human decision makers. Lastly, what about reason giving? These are black box algorithms. So how can you square that with a governmental transparency that we demand? Wouldn't that violate the arbitrary and capricious standard, for example, because you can't really explain why these algorithms give the outcomes they give? Well, not likely. I don't think that likely. As long as you can disclose the assumptions and methods used and the validation techniques, I think you should be fine. And the courts have generally deferred to agencies anyway on complex matters, which in Baltimore Gas and Electric's terms are at the frontiers of science. And that's where we're at. And agencies can engage in good practices to disclose how they develop their algorithms and how they've tested them. So I don't think we can really count on traditional administrative law. In fact, in some ways, I think administrative law maybe leads us to and will lead us to want to use certain artificial intelligence tools. An automated state, I've written, could be thought of as the apotheosis of administrative law. Why? Because administrative law is all about the control of discretion. And these algorithms, if they are structured and formatted, the parameters are set, they're going to do what they've been designed to do and not necessarily run the problems that we've worried about in administrative law. However, does this always mean we should use AI? No. I mean, there's certainly going to be preconditions for its use. The kinds of sui generis situations that law encounters, it won't be usable. You're going to need to have situations where it's very clear and precise what the goal is, optimizing for traffic safety for pilots in a way that could be defined precisely. We're going to have data available. Sometimes that won't be the case. A lot of government information is not in machine usable form yet. We'll also need to have external validity to the data. So the way algorithms or learning algorithms operate, you train them on a training data set and then you apply it to new data. Well, if the world is changing, you won't have external validity. ChatGPT was trained on data that were current as of September 2021. What does that mean? You won't find a whole lot of information or help from ChatGPT about how to deal with the current war by Russia invading Ukraine, because that happened after that algorithms model was trained. We also need to look for when it's going to make a difference. We have to show that it will improve on the goals that we want to have met, that we have to look for the impacts on the direct users and make sure that there aren't side effects. Sometimes when people are engaged in goal-oriented behavior, they forget that actually there's multiple goals. Regulators in New Zealand a number of years ago shifted to a new way of regulating buildings that preserved the structural integrity of buildings in New Zealand, but they forgot that they also needed to make sure buildings were resistant to moisture. And when they shifted to that single-minded goal, they had a lot of buildings that led to a major crisis in New Zealand, buildings with mildew. We've seen similar experiences with child-resistant packaging regulations in the US, initially designed to keep kids out of medicines and household chemicals, also kept adults out too. And actually, when the adults finally opened these things, they tended to leave them open, and we saw an increase in childhood poisoning. So have to think about all the ways that users will be impacted by the goals of artificial intelligence, bias certainly being one of those concerns too. And also just think about the broader societal impacts as well. If we're using AI to determine the safety of pilots, we not only have to think about the pilots and how they're affected, but also think about the passengers in the planes. Now, the National Research Council has noted that the introduction of any new technology is likely to raise concerns about its impact on society, potential harm to the interest of individuals, threats to liberty or privacy being only some of the worries. I find this quote particularly interesting because it came from a National Research Council report in 1992 about DNA technology, and particularly about the use of DNA technology in the courts. And at that time, DNA technology was actually being viewed with a good bit of skepticism. One court decision actually rejected its use early on. And yet today, DNA technology is used and thought of as the gold standard. So how do we get something like a gold standard, if we're going to, out of AI technology? Can we get beyond the current skepticism and fears about AI to something that people are comfortable with, maybe even are demanding in the same way they demand for DNA testing today? Well, I think you're going to find that there's several paths to consider. We need better standards. You see this with DNA. Need impact assessment and auditing. Also see this as having happened with DNA. We'll need to have systems of oversight, and this court system has overseen DNA technology. We'll have to figure out what's the best oversight for AI. And we've had standards for qualification and qualified personnel to use these tools. Because if we don't, we are going to have risks and uncertainties, perpetuating biases. There's concerns about these large language models persuading people to inflict harm on others or on themselves. There's concerns about spreading disinformation. There's obvious job dislocation effects when we think about what this will do to transforming sectors of the economy, maybe like law, that have relied on on humans to do a lot of tasks that now AI tools could do. We also have to think about a loss ultimately of human skill. The more we rely on AI to regulate or to adjudicate, will we have people who can actually still understand whether those tools are working in a valid way? We all probably have less ability to navigate today once we start relying on Google Maps, for example. And then there's a host of other unknown adverse consequences. I think we're going to need to have governance that's agile, flexible, and vigilance going forward, in part because the AI is not one single technology for one single use. And that's why an approach to governance that I've called management-based, it's a model similar to the National Environmental Policy Act's environmental impact statement model. I think we may have to see government agencies engaging in algorithmic impact assessments before they start to use these tools and be able to identify all the potential harms and demonstrate that they've been using them well. I think government agencies also need to think about these issues when they're procuring private sector consultation services for AI. They need to ensure that government contracts provide for the private contractor to have an obligation to disclose information about that algorithm for proper oversight. And those contracts can also provide a basis for putting in place standards for the responsible use of AI. Now, this doesn't mean that every single use will have to be at the fullest due diligence, but the more that AI is being used in high-stake areas to make decisions rather than just as an input to them, those are the red areas that we need to focus on more. I think some of the larger barriers to AI as law will be a completeness of goals. We have to actually know all of the goals, not just keeping children from opening bottles, but we want to make adults be able to open them too. That's going to be true in all sorts of applications of AI. We'll have to have some consensus on values and trade-offs. These algorithms have to be mathematically designed to optimize for some goals with constraints of others and trade-offs that will need to be defined mathematically in precise terms. We today in law often rely on what Cass Sunstein has called incompletely theorized agreements, reasonable care instead of mathematical precision. And we'll have to have data, again, to do all of this. We can overcome those barriers, but probably not perfectly. All we have to do, though, is overcome them so that systems work better than they do today. I think as people grow more accustomed to algorithmic decision-making tools in the private sector, they're going to come to expect that more in the public sector as well. So custom will emerge, and we also have to make sure we have competence. If AI as law and as governance does improve things, and if they can be demonstrated, then that's going to, I think, lead to greater trust and acceptance of it. Finally, as I said at the outset, I think we have to preserve a role for human empathy, even in a system that's more fully automated than we have today. Now, our current system is not necessarily always empathic. Anybody who has gone for a driver's license may wonder whether we have a very empathic system today. Bureaucracies can be cold and impersonal, even when they're organized by humans. But if we can replace a lot of the drudgery work that humans are engaged in now, redirect them and find ways to build human points of contact in a system of the future that relies much more on automated tools, that I think is the thing to do. Ultimately, and to conclude, I think the status quo is far from perfect. And if we can find, with responsible use of artificial intelligence tools, a way to do better, producing faster, more accurate, more consistent outcomes, and doing so with empathy, then that's what we should aim for. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Well, Professor, we've got a number of questions in the chat, so I'll take them in order in the 10 minutes or so that we have left. First question, do you think that AI could improve the application of Chevron deference?
Well, I'm not sure Chevron deference is still the rule of law. So that's one thing for sure. But I do, here's how I think there is going to be a possibility of figuring out whether an algorithm can come up with a clear meaning from particular statutory terms. And I think you could find that you could have computational tools, which already exist, quite frankly, to determine whether particular text is clear or ambiguous. And if Chevron is still with us, and step one is still to find out whether the statute is clear or ambiguous, maybe we should be actually not relying just on judges deciding whether it's, seems clear or not to them, but some objective way of determining the clarity or ambiguity in text. It's a possibility, absolutely.
Great. Next question is also, how would AI relate to making credibility determinations?
Well, we think we can do that as humans a lot better than we really can. There's a wonderful book by Malcolm Gladwell called Talking with Strangers, or Talking to Strangers. And he reviews how people think that they can determine whether a witness is telling the truth or not. And people are just invariably overconfident about their ability to do that. So a well-validated tool could be quite useful for that purpose.
The next question relates to your point about the traffic lights in Pittsburgh. And I apologize if I mangle this question. They asked, does the AI controlling the traffic lights conform to the federal MUTCD? The person is asking because PennDOT incorporated that in the traffic control regulations. And so if AI doesn't conform to those regulations, then the AI would not be able to be legally used.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I don't happen to have the specifics around that particular issue, but one would imagine that they've taken that into consideration. One would hope they have. I will say that in principle, it's possible to build into an algorithm various constraints. So it's not, to have you can have a system that not only optimizes for traffic control, but optimizes for traffic control subject to specifically defined constraints. And if that's one that we need to make sure that systems are complying with, then it could, in principle, certainly be programmed into the algorithm.
Another question in terms of the impact of AI in this case, how could you see it affecting the rulemaking process? For example, could people use AI to draft comments to proposed regulations?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, they already do. I mean, there's an ACUS recommendation on mass comments and robo comments. So we have a lot of automated systems. I think what's really transformational about the ChatGPT technology and the large language models is that people could have now mass comment campaigns that generate comments that look different, even though they're all sort of saying the same thing, either in support of or in opposition to a proposed rule. Right now, what federal agencies are using are duplication software to sort through when they have a mass comment campaign, and they will treat all of the comments that are identified as duplicate, that is saying exactly the same thing, as one comment, essentially. With ChatGPT, mass comment campaigns will now be able to generate different kinds of comments automatically, but still, again, supporting or opposing a rule. And the duplication software won't really work. So there'll be probably need for government agencies to develop other kinds of software. There's now already tools that use AI to try to detect whether ChatGPT has been used to create an essay. Teachers know about this tool, for example. Something like that could be deployed by agencies as well in helping analyze large volumes of comments. I should add, by the way, that there's other transformational purposes along these lines. A lot of regulated entities right now have a lot of paperwork burdens where they have to file reports with government agencies, securities disclosure reports. These kind of large language models may well be deployed in the near future, really, to help firms generate that paperwork. We may find that agencies need to develop tools drawing on similar algorithms to process them and identify potential areas of concern with them. So what the whole area of paperwork reduction that we have built up over the years may well be transformed because of these technologies.
We've had a couple of questions about judges using ChatGPT to draft opinions, or at least first drafts of opinions, and also how that might relate to the transparency of the thinking process and judicial review.
Mm-hmm. Sure, or you could think about agencies using them to develop preambles or the like. I mean, I think we'll see much more of that already. I believe a court in Columbia, if I'm not mistaken, has used ChatGPT to develop a court opinion. I think an agency in Canada, if I'm not mistaken, has relied on it to develop some response. So we're going to see those tools being used increasingly. There's always been a question about transparency, by the way, right? Going back to the legal realists, we are, had always questions about whether what judges are writing themselves in their opinions. And by the way, we've known judges now to be relying on clerks, right? So in some ways, the large language models might be thought of as automated clerks. If judges use them in that way, there may be responsible ways to do so. I do think there's the risk, of course, that when these algorithms hallucinate, as it's called, and create errors in their reasoning, we have to be concerned that judges, humans, and others are able to catch those concerns. I think the large concern going forward, now maybe this is decades off, is just a loss of human knowledge to be able to evaluate whether what an algorithm is producing is really very meaningful or not. We have to maintain graduates from law schools, humans who are going forward and gaining skills and thinking critically, and so that they can still assess the quality of these tools.
And a last question, I think this is an appropriate one. The New York Times had an article this week that the legal profession is one of the professions that is at most at risk of losing jobs, due to artificial intelligence. How big is that risk? Another way of asking this is, should we continue to schedule CLEs, or should we plan on this being our last CLE?
You should still have CLEs. There's going to be no immediate decline in demand for legal services. But will there be some change? Yes. How much so? There are lots of varying opinions about that. I think the more pessimistic ones are that there will be a lot fewer jobs for lawyers in the future. The more perhaps optimistic ones are that lawyers can be freed of a lot of the routine work that they engage in. They can become more efficient and hopefully deploy their skills in a way that meets better the demands for legal services. We have a lot of unmet needs out there today, and if automation can help free up some of those resources so we can help other people, or some of the automated tools themselves can help people who are currently unable to even find an attorney. These should be good things. So I'll leave on that optimistic note.
That is a great place to end. Thank you for such a fascinating and timely topic on behalf of the Law and Government Institute. And now I'll turn things back to Dean Hussey to close us out.
Thank you, Rob, for that. It's great to have all of you here. Very insightful professor on where we're going with artificial intelligence, both in society and the legal profession. So thank you again to all of our guests joining us today. We've been delighted, and thank you, John Gedid, as well, for your leadership over all the years. Have a good night, everyone.
Widener University Commonwealth Law School is the Pennsylvania capital's only law school, with 3 specialized centers of legal scholarship through its Law and Government Institute, Environmental Law and Sustainability Center, and Business Advising Program. Widener Law Commonwealth offers an exceptional learning experience that is personal, practical, and professional. Visit commonwealthlaw.widener.edu for more information.